Hey y'all, welcome to Peyton Energetics. I'm Peyton, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about something that is known in the galactic community as the law of non-interference. And this is a very important concept that governs and controls how our galactic family communicates with us, what kinds of information they can share with us, and how they're allowed to interact with us here in the human world. Now, if you have seen any of my recent videos, you know that we've been talking a lot lately about how starseeds and lightworkers can prepare themselves to communicate and connect with their star family, because this is something that so many starseeds are super excited to do. And as y'all know, the window for open contact opens in 2023. So as we, as the Awakened community, get more and more excited about rejoining the galactic family and reconnecting with our multidimensional friends, it can be very helpful to understand some of the rules and requirements that bind our galactic family so that we can understand why they share the information they share and why there are some things that they just can't tell us right now. So one of those big concepts that controls what our galactic family can tell us and what kind of information they can share with us is something known in the galactic community as the law of non-interference. So in today's video, we're going to be diving into what this law is, what it really means, and how our understanding of it can help us better connect with our galactic family. Now, if you are a starseed and if you have been on your awakening journey for a while, you have probably heard references to this law of non-interference throughout the course of your spiritual training and education. But I find that it's one of those topics that a lot of starseeds don't really understand what it is. As y'all know, I am a Pleiadian channel, and my guide team is primarily Pleiadian. So whenever I am sharing things that I have learned, I am coming from the perspective of my personal guide team. So I asked the Pleiadians to help us understand this law of non-interference. What does it really mean? What does it really allow? What does it not allow? So that we can understand and communicate and connect better with our multidimensional family. So when you hear the words law of non-interference, it can be a little confusing. I know that when I first started hearing about this concept, I was a little confused because I didn't see how there could be a galactic law against interfering with certain civilizations, such as us here on Earth, because it seemed, from the perspective of what I understood about our galactic history, that Earth has been pretty heavily interfered with throughout its entire lifespan. So if you are someone who is up to speed on your galactic history, if you have heard what the guides have been sharing with us about the history of humanity, one of the first things that you may be left with as an impression, and this is certainly what my reaction has been as I learn more and more from the guides about our galactic history and our history here on Earth, and that is Earth has been thoroughly interfered with. We have been meddled with as a species. Our DNA has been tinkered with, both in a positive direction and a very not positive direction. And so if you look at what the guides tell us is our galactic history, it's hard to imagine that there's a rule against non-interference, because one of my first reactions was, how can that be when everybody has had their paws in meddling with humanity? It didn't seem like something that made a whole lot of sense. But one of the ways that I really started to come to question this supposed law of non-interference is that I noticed that there were certain types of information that my guides wouldn't share with me. And as I was listening to some of my favorite teachers over the years, some of the channel beings that we all know and love, I've noticed that there are certain topics they will absolutely not entertain. So you may notice that you're listening to channelers and people will ask a question and they will shut it down completely. They will say, we can't tell you that at this time. It's not appropriate for us to share that. So law of non-interference can show itself in our experience in a number of different ways. And one of the ways it showed up for me, because as y'all know, I am a Pleiadian channel, is I would ask the Pleiadians questions and I would get radio silence. They would not respond at all, no matter how often I asked the question, how clever I thought I was being in reframing it. It just was met with absolute silence. So as I started to learn more about this concept of non-interference, I asked the Pleiadians to explain what it really meant. How does this actually operate? Before we jump into talking about what the law of non-interference actually says, what it actually requires, it's important to understand that our galactic family is as diverse as we are as humans. So there is a scale in our galactic family of something you may think of as benevolence. So we have galactic beings and star races that are very loving, very benevolent, and want the best for humanity. They want to teach us, they want to help us grow and expand, they want to share knowledge and technology with us. But just as in the human world, you have people who are loving and generous and kind, and you have quite the opposite. It's no different in our galactic family. So when we start to step back into the galactic world, the galactic arena, which we've been kind of shut out of as we go through our third density, third dimensional experience, but as we approach the move into the fifth dimension, we are reopening the door to connecting with our galactic family. And so as we do that, it is important for us to remember that we have a big range of benevolence and helpfulness in our galactic world, our galactic family, as we do in the human world. So when we are talking about some of these galactic rules, some of what we may call laws, we're talking about things that are generally only recognized and followed by the more benevolent races. So the benevolent races are what we often call in the galactic community, those races that are primarily service to others. So these are races that are dedicated to helping, to sharing the love, sharing the knowledge, sharing the light, but are very aware and concerned with not overstepping. So races on the more benevolent end of the spectrum will be very cautious about not overstepping or stepping on anyone else's free will. So when we talk about concepts like the law of non-interference, these laws are recognized by the benevolent end of the spectrum of our galactic family. Now, on the other end, just as in our human world, we have humans who will happily violate any law, step on anyone else's rights, privileges, free will. We have the same in the galactic family. So when we look at our spectrum of benevolence, there are a number of races that fall on what we call the non-benevolent end of the scale. And as are so many things in our life, everything is a scale. So you have the very extreme benevolence and you have the exact opposite, the beings that we consider to be highly negative, highly regressive, even downright malevolent. And these are the beings that we call in the galactic community races that are primarily service to self. So these are races that are very happy and willing to do whatever benefits them. And this is easy to understand because, hello, this happens in the human population as well. So when we talk about non-benevolent races, we are often talking about those races or those beings. And again, we can't say that an entire race is any one thing because, again, everything is a spectrum. But when we talk about the less benevolent end of the scale, those beings and races that we would consider to be service to self, these beings don't necessarily recognize or abide by the same laws and guidelines that our benevolent races do. So when we talk about concepts like the law of non-interference, this is something that is generally recognized by those beings and races that are service to others, what we may consider to be our benevolent star family. So that's who we are talking about when we talk about the law of non-interference. Because as you can imagine, these beings who are purely service to self have no problem interfering with us, with enslaving humanity, doing terrible things. That's kind of what they're all about. So just keep in mind as we talk about some of these galactic laws, these galactic concepts, that we tend to be primarily talking about rules and guidelines that our benevolent star family recognizes. So the law of non-interference is certainly one of those. So when we talk about the law of non-interference, this is something that only the benevolent species recognize. But it is something that is incredibly important to them. Now, something else that is important to understand as we talk about some of these galactic concepts, like the law of non-interference, is that the wording of these concepts means something a little different in the galactic community than they do to our human ears. So when we say things like the law of non-interference, the word law means something a little different to our human ears than it does in the galactic community. So to us as humans, when we hear the word law, we of course think of something that is written in stone and binding and mandatory on everyone, and there's no wiggle room, and there are punishments if you don't follow it, right? That's what laws mean to us as humans. But when we use this word in a more multidimensional concept, the word law is a little more flexible. So when we talk about the law of non-interference, according to the guides, what this really is a guideline, but a guideline they take extremely seriously. So what exactly is this law of non-interference that we have heard so many whispers and rumblings about? Because this is something that over the course of my spiritual training, I heard references to it. The guides would say they can't interfere, or someone would talk about the prime directive, which sounds very Star Trek-y. And so I heard little bits and pieces about this law, but I never really heard any member of our galactic family explain exactly what it is. What does it say? What does it require? What is in bounds and what is out of bounds? So according to the Pleiadians, when we talk about the law of non-interference, we're talking about a concept in the benevolent galactic community where more advanced races are prohibited from sharing certain types of information, knowledge, and technology with developing or evolving civilizations. Now, Earth, of course, falls into the category of an evolving or developing civilization. And the reason for that is because, as y'all know, we are at the very bottom of the frequency scale. As we are emerging from the third dimension, we are at the bottom of the dimensional scale for beings that are still self-aware. So we are at the bottom of the totem pole as far as galactic development goes. So as we start to raise our vibration as a collective and move through the ascension process, we have now, of course, moved into fourth dimension or early fourth density, depending on how you like to think of that. And what this means is we are operating at a much lower frequency, much lower dimension than most of the galactic family. So because of that, most of our galactic family is vastly more developed than we are, more technologically advanced than we are, and higher in consciousness than we are. So that is why as we start to work with our galactic family and our guides, we notice that they are in much higher densities and dimensions than we are. So because of that, because humanity has been in 3D for so long, as we talk about in the spiritual community, we are considered to be an evolving civilization. We're the newbies. We are the toddlers of the galactic community. We have not yet achieved free energy. We have not yet achieved interstellar travel. So our technology, our knowledge, our consciousness is very rudimentary compared to that of the broader galactic family. And because of that, there are certain guidelines in the galactic community to prevent more experienced galactic races, more advanced races, from interfering in our development. Because the idea is that evolving civilizations should be able to evolve in a way that is unhindered, uninfluenced. Now, this is something that is kind of funny, because if you know your galactic history, if you've listened to the guides talk about the history of humanity, you know that Earth has been thoroughly meddled with, thoroughly interfered with throughout the entire history of its existence. So when I first heard about this law of non-interference, it kind of made me laugh, because when I looked at the history of Earth as the guides have explained it to us, I see nothing but interference. So the law of non-interference is kind of a tricky subject, but the overall goal with it is to prevent more advanced races from interfering with the natural development and evolution of an evolving civilization. So one of the practical applications of this law is that it prevents our galactic family, the more advanced races, from sharing information, knowledge, and technology that an evolving civilization can't handle wisely. So it wants to protect evolving civilizations from knowledge and technology that it could use to harm itself or others. So kind of like you don't want to give a child a gun, that's kind of the general concept of the law of non-interference. It's to prevent more advanced races from either interfering with a developing nation, civilization, or to prevent these races from sharing technology and information that we're not ready for, that we can't handle wisely. So one of the reasons that this has been such a big deal on Earth is because the more advanced races don't want to share technology that could then be used against the human population. And they also don't want to share technology that we could use to harm ourselves or harm others. Because as we have seen on our planet, certain of the technologies that we have already developed have the potential not only to destroy our planet, but to actually, as the guides explain, rip through the fabric of the dimensions. This becomes a very big issue, something that our galactic family is watching very closely. When a civilization gets to the point of developing technologies that can destroy itself. So we started to get a lot of galactic attention when we developed nuclear weapons in the 1940s. That is when the galactic community really sat up and started to take notice of planet Earth, because the kids were playing with dangerous toys. So that is when our galactic family started seeing that there was really a need to support Earth and to help Earth raise its vibrational frequency before we did something truly disastrous. But because of the law of non-interference, our benevolent family members, our benevolent star races, were limited in how they could help us. They were limited in the technologies they could give us. They were limited in how they were allowed to contact us, because another part of the law of non-interference says that more advanced races can't contact or communicate with lesser evolved races except through technologies that already exist in that civilization. So our galactic family was limited in several different ways because of this very important requirement of non-interference. Now, as I said, the law of non-interference is one of those concepts that sounds very simple and clear when you hear it. Okay, you can't interfere with a newer civilization, no problem, I get it. But in reality, it's much more complicated than that. Because of course, for any good law, what do we have? We have loopholes and we have exceptions. So there are some exceptions built into the law of non-interference because, as we have said, what civilization has been more heavily meddled with and interfered with than us here on Earth? So some of the exceptions to the law of non-interference are some circumstances where more advanced races are allowed to share information, knowledge, and technology with evolving races that they wouldn't otherwise be able to share. So one of the first exceptions to the law of non-interference is that advanced races are allowed to interact more with an evolving civilization if the purpose of the interaction is to right an earlier wrong. So if you have an emerging civilization that experienced a violation of the law of non-interference, where a negative race or even a benevolent race, thinking they were doing something positive, ended up negatively influencing an emerging civilization, benevolent races are allowed to step in to correct the earlier violation. So the point of that is, if a mistake has been made, you're allowed to go in and attempt to correct it. So we don't want to make things worse because of this non-interference protocol. So there is a loophole or an exception that is part of the law of the non-interference that says advanced races can step in. They can take a role that they would otherwise be not allowed to take if there has been a wrong committed against a newer civilization. So as you hear this, you might start to be understanding how this starts to be very relevant to us here on Earth. Because what do we know from the galactic history that our guides have shared with us? It is that we have been tampered with. Our DNA has been limited. It has been restricted. We have had our frequency as a planet suppressed. That's the only reason we can experience 3D, is because we have been placed in an artificial hologram that suppresses our frequency. So Earth has been meddled with, tampered with throughout our entire history. So one of the caveats that lets the galactic family step in to help us here on Earth and to correct some of the things that have been done to humanity throughout its history, either coming from good intentions but bad execution, or coming from very negative intentions. So there is an exception in the law of non-interference that allows our star family to provide extra help if a wrong has been done to us, to an emerging civilization. And very similar to this, there is also a permission in the law of non-interference that allows a race to not just correct mistakes that have been made, but to correct things that were done with benevolent intentions, but ended up having negative consequences. So this is kind of a twist on the original caveat, which is races can step in to correct intentional wrongs that have been done to an emerging civilization. But if a race has intended to help an evolving civilization, but ended up making a mess, and this is something that some of our benevolent ancestors fell into, where they tried to help correct the damage that was done to humanity and ended up making things worse. But it wasn't their intention to harm us necessarily. So this is another one of those situations where star races are given more flexibility to interact with humanity and other evolving civilizations to correct things that went awry, basically. And another caveat or exception to the law of non-interference says that advanced races are allowed to step in to help a newer civilization if the newer civilization is being threatened by an outside source. So if they are being threatened with attack, if they are being threatened with enslavement, this gives our galactic family a permission slip to step in to help protect the emerging civilization. And this may go back to what we have heard in our galactic history was the devastating experience that the galaxy went through during the Lyran Wars. So there were massive violent wars in our galactic history that really scarred and traumatized our galactic family. And so because of these terrible wars, the benevolent galactic races didn't want to see that happen again. And so while there is a very strong presumption that advanced races are to keep their hands off of new races, to not interfere, the galactic races didn't want to see any more of the devastation that happened during the Lyran Wars, where entire planets were destroyed, entire civilizations were wiped out or driven throughout the galaxy. So our galactic family understood that there needed to be a precaution to prevent negative races from annihilating or severely impacting evolving civilizations. So because of some of this galactic trauma that we all carry from the Lyran Wars, there is some leeway in the law of non-interference to allow more advanced races to step in if a newer civilization is being threatened by negative forces, negative factions, because again, no one wanted a repeat of the Lyran Wars. And finally, one of the other main exceptions to the law of non-interference is where we start to get even more murky and complex. And that is that there is allegedly a caveat to the law of non-interference, which allows more advanced races to step in to assist a newer developing civilization if it is for the greater good. And as a former lawyer myself, that is a provision that gives me the chills, because as we have seen play out on Earth, what is the greater good? It depends completely on who is defining it. So this is one of those loopholes that you can start to see how things can unravel, because certain times, as we used to say in law, the exceptions swallow the rule. So as you can see, as you start to hear some of the exceptions to the law of non-interference, some of the caveats, some of the loopholes, you can see how things start to get very murky. So as you can imagine, as you start to hear more of the specifics of this law of non-interference, you can see how it's not as cut and dried as you might have thought at first. So when I first heard of this concept, again, I was like, okay, that sounds easy, no problem. But then as I heard more details of it, what the exceptions are, you can see how it starts to get very complicated. And this is one of the reasons why we can see different star races interpreting this concept differently. So some star races you may see take an absolute conservative approach to the law of non-interference. So I like to watch some of the star races who will not go anywhere near a violation of the law of non-interference. They don't want to hear about gray areas. They will not do anything that might put them in a situation of having interfered. But you have other benevolent races, and sometimes the Pleiadians can be front runners for this side of the equation, where they think that interference is warranted when a civilization doesn't know what has been done to them. So one thing that you may see in some of the Pleiadians, including some of my guides, is they tend to think that humanity has a right to know certain things, that certain things have been done to humanity, and they take a more flexible, progressive, and not to say progressive in a negative approach, but a more flexible, proactive, maybe that's a better word, proactive approach to the law of non-interference, of thinking that humanity has a right to know what has been done to it, that we can't correct the ship ourselves if we don't know what has been done to us. So for that reason, certain of our star family will take a more flexible approach. They are more willing to push the boundaries because they believe that that is what serves us. And so some races will share information with us, share technologies with us in ways that other star races will absolutely not. So one of the interesting things that we notice as we become more multidimensional is we start to see different interpretations in different star races. So some ways that you may see this show up as you go through your spiritual education is you may notice that certain star races will not entertain certain topics. There are certain topics they won't even discuss. Some of the topics that are often shut down as things that certain of our star family will not get into is you may notice them refusing to talk about Earth politics. You may notice them refusing to talk about Earth current events. You may notice certain star races refusing to talk about the matrix or the ascension, except in very, very broad general terms. And you may see that certain star races are very hesitant to talk about ET or multidimensional activity on the planet. So you may see them refusing to talk about what races are here on the planet now. So there are just some topics that certain of our star family are very reluctant to get into because it gets close to this line of non-interference. And each star race and probably every single star being interprets this their own way. So as you start to work with your guides, your star family, and hear what other star beings are saying, you'll start to see some of the differences in how they interpret this concept. Some are very, very rigid, very conservative about it. They don't want to come anywhere near crossing this line, whereas others say, pushing the boundaries and helping humanity is justified because of what has been done to humanity. And so they see that as a valid exercise of the law of non-interference, that it is appropriate to provide more information to humans so that we can correct our path ourselves. One argument that the Pleiadians make that I resonate with is a civilization like Earth, we can't correct our mistakes if we don't know when we're being lied to. It's very difficult for us to know truth from fiction when we're constantly being manipulated, when we're constantly being lied to. And so because Earth is in such an unusual situation where so much has been done to us to manipulate us, to try to undo the manipulation, that applying the law of non-interference to us here on Earth gets to be very, very tricky. And so that is why you will see, and I like to watch this as I listen to different star races talk. I like to see how they each interpret this concept, because again, you will start to see a huge variety in how our galactic family thinks it's appropriate to apply this concept. So one of the reasons that the law of non-interference is such an important topic and why I'm doing this whole video on it is because it can help us understand how and why things are playing out the way they are on Earth right now. So understanding why our galactic family interacts with us in certain ways, why they tell us certain things but not others, can help us understand and relate to them more easily. So because Earth has been such a focal point of galactic attention recently, and certainly even over the past couple thousand years, but most definitely since the 1940s, and as we are approaching our transition into fifth dimension, the galactic community had to get fairly creative with how could they help humanity out of 3D, out of this artificial matrix, without running afoul of the law of non-interference. So that's one of the reasons why this concept is so important for us to understand as lightworkers and starseeds. Some of the ways that our galactic family came up with to help Earth out of this density that we have been trapped in for thousands and thousands of years is to find certain creative ways to work with the law of non-interference so that they didn't violate it. So one of the ways that the guides have done that is actually one of the ways the galactic community figured out how to do that, how to support Earth and provide more help and guidance on the ground without violating the law of non-interference is through the STARSEED program. So as I mentioned earlier, in the 40s, when humans started to play with very dangerous toys, mainly our nuclear weapons, that is when the galactic family, our galactic community, really stood up and started to take notice of us, because humanity had gotten to a point in its evolution where it was capable of destroying not just itself, but other realms and dimensions as well. So the galactic community knew that they had to do something to right the ship, essentially. And one of the ways they did that, because they couldn't just land and take over, because that would violate the non-interference protocols. So one of the creative ways our galactic family came up with to provide more support to Earth, to help it out of the density, out of the separation, was through the concept of the STARSEED program. So the galactic community started to send starseeds, which of course are humans that incarnate on Earth, but whose soul comes from another galactic civilization, came to Earth to bring higher vibrational knowledge and information and implant it into the Earth's grid system. So by doing this, because starseeds were actually incarnated as humans on the planet, they could bring multidimensional frequency, multidimensional knowledge, multidimensional wisdom to Earth without violating the non-interference protocol. So this was one of the ways, and that is why we talk so much about starseeds, is because starseeds are one of the ways that our galactic family came up with to help Earth raise its vibration and ascend without violating the non-interference protocol. So as you can see, this concept of non-interference is a really big deal, and it's particularly complex as it applies to Earth because of the uniquely complex history that we have had here. So non-interference is one of those things that can help us understand our galactic family better and why they share things and don't share other things. And it can also help us just understand how things are playing out the way they are on Earth right now, because so many people want to know why contact isn't happening faster, or why the advanced races aren't just sharing all of their wonderful technology. There's a reason for that. And one of the big reasons is the law of non-interference. So I hope this has helped you understand a little better where our galactic family is coming from. Let me know in the comments below what you understand about the law of non-interference, especially if your guides have given you a different explanation. Again, everything is perspective. So drop that in the comments below. And while you're at it, don't forget, hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't done that yet. I'll see you soon. Bye.